Hey everybody, my name is Jared Bendis, and today I'm going to show you a very elaborate, complicated procedure in which I turned this lovely book cover into an actual block print. If you're watching this, I'd like to say thank you. You can find me on Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Twitch, Patreon, at JaredX2. So please, if you like, subscribe, follow, tell your friends, all the good stuff. So I want to start off at the beginning. This is not a full how-to step-by-step. This is actually some pretty complicated stuff. This is the way I do it. I'm sure there's a better way that you do it, and that's lovely. I'm just going to show you the way that I've gone through this process and share with you what I've done. Now, there is a lot to this, and there's many hours of work. So I'm going to sort of do the whole kitchen demo type thing where I put the pie in the oven, and then I pull the pie out. Also, not all the steps are complete right now, so you get a general overview of what I'm looking at. What you're looking at right now in front of you is the cover of The Hunting of the Snark by Lewis Carroll from 1876. This is a wonderful image. Of course, it's a book cover, so this is a photograph, a very high resolution photograph of it, and of course this was a block print that was done. It's a physical item, there's dimensionality to it. This was actually photographed, not put on a scanner, but regardless, there's still dimensionality to it. Nothing's ever going to be perfect. You're talking about the imperfections of life and all that type of good stuff. But I want a print of this. Now, of course I can Photoshop out and make it a beautiful black and white image and laser print it and hang it on my wall, but no, I want an old school print. And of course, because I own a laser cutter and because I took printmaking in college several times, I figured why not go all the way out and make a really beautiful fine art print from this image. There's a lot of steps involved and there's a lot of things that are hard-coded. Hard-coded by the fact that you have to know where you're going with it. And that's a really strange thing in digital age. Everyone's like, well, I can make it whatever I want. But I'm really going to be going for a level of precision, and this level of precision demands that I kind of know where I'm going. So let's take a look over here right now. I'm looking at this book. I'm going to come over and take a look at what my original photograph looks like. And right now I'm looking at 7.6 inches by 10.955 inches at 600 dpi. So that's literally how many pixels I have. This is the absolute best that I've got. Now that being said, I've decided that I want to make my composition, right now this is about 7 by 11 or 7 by 11. I'm going to make this an 8 by 10. 8 by 10 is the standard size, so I'm going to fit this image inside of an 8 by 10. That's number one. So I know what my goal is going to be. Remember, I'm going to create a physical object. This is going to be a print object, so it's going to exist in the real world. So I'm actually going to create for that real item right now. It's a very difficult thing when you think about it, because I was going to create a 4 by 5, there'd be a different fidelity to it. Each different type of item has different parameters that go along to it. The scaling does make a difference. So right now I'm aiming for 8 by 10, and this again is important. Let me come over here to the next file. I'm going to be going back and forth through the files here. In the next file, what we have here is the cover. I've cropped the cover, and I placed it on an 8 by 10 document. I've kept the entire image, and you can see this is what the basic composition will look like when I lay it on a piece of paper. And again, it'll be nice. You really want to think about standard sizes. 8 by 10 is nice. People can put it in a standard mat, standard frame. Glorious. There you go. Now, that being said, remember I had 600 dpi. Now, before I move on, before I start to make any other adjustments, I want to lock my dpi in stone. And that's really going to tell me what resolution I'm playing with. Now you're like, well, what DPI do you need? Now, normally, 300 DPI is great, 600 DPI is great, but I'm going to be putting this on the laser cutter. And so let's come over here and take a look at what things look like in the Glowforge. Ignore the picture that's already up on the screen and realize that when I'm doing an engrave inside the Glowforge, I get to decide how many lines per inch. And what you'll notice is that the standard ones aren't there. Right? There isn't 300 lines per inch. There isn't 600 lines per inch. There's 340 and 450 and 675. So I've got to make a decision here, because what I don't want is I don't want someone else's software making approximations for me. I want to design for it and print to it. I want to design for it and cut to it. This is my philosophy about these things, and what ends up happening is you don't get any extrapolation errors. You don't get anybody trying to mess with your data. You give it a pixel, it gives you a pixel, and that's the end of that. So if I look over here, 270 is nice, but this is some really fine line work in here. So you know what? In for a penny, in for a pound, I'm going to go for 675. Now what that means is that before I do any work in Photoshop, I'm going to come over here and I'm going to go to image, image size, and I'm going to change this to 8 by 10 by 675. This is an absolute resampling of it. And I've already had created my canvas as 8 by 10, but now I've set it to 675 dots per inch, pixels per inch. The thing about it is that when I resize it at this point, because I haven't done any transformation work on it, whatever Photoshop does is fine. Photoshop will upscale it, Photoshop will downscale it. I'm okay with that because I'm going to be the one that does the handwork. I'm going to be the one that does the tough work to make this an absolute image. So here it is, 8 by 10 by 675, because that's what the Glowforge wants. That's what my laser cutter is going to want. If your laser cutter wants different numbers, then I would give it different numbers. And that really means that if I was going to go to 270, was it 270 or 240? If I was going to do 270 lines per inch, then I would lock this at 270 now, so that as I'm doing all my pixel work, I know exactly what my fidelity numbers are like. And this is very important from a design perspective, because you want to make sure that your technology holds throughout. Everything's going to be about errors adding to each other, and we want to avoid that. Lovely. So I've got my composition, I've got my pixels, I got everything ready to go, and now I've got to turn this into an absolute black and white image. Now there's some very tricky things here, because a lot of times you're like, oh, I can just grayscale this. I don't want it to be grayscale. When you're doing a laser, when you're doing an engraving, when you're doing a rubber stamp or any sort of wood block, you're going to have these different levels here. And the only level that matters is the top level. That's the level that's going to get the ink. Anything else, anything that is below that top level, whether it's all the way down or part of the way down, it won't pick up the ink. So really this is a binary problem. At least at first, it's a binary problem. I need everything on one level, which means I don't want any aliasing. I don't want any semi-transparent pixels. I don't want any grayscale pixels. And I definitely don't want to try to turn my image into a dithered image. Now, if you're doing photographs, one of the ways you turn a photograph into a series of grayscales, you simulate grayscale by creating a dither pattern or a dot pattern. But there's no photograph here. This was actually originally carved in, and I want to make it look like that original carving block. So I want to make sure I avoid dithering, I avoid aliasing. By the way, some of these natural edges will come back, by the way. That's the cool thing about the organic process of the laser carving or the laser engraving, like a carved process. But right now, I want to keep everything as clean as possible. So I need to turn this image, which has an enormous variety of data, into something that is absolutely pure black. I would say in pure white, but I'll show you in a minute, there'll be no white absolutely in the moment. So how do you do this? Now, I've come over here in Photoshop, and if you know Photoshop, I've created a document with multiple layers, and I've done this because I like to have little backup plans here. So I'm going to talk about, I'm going to go to this copy over here, turn off that one. I'm going to be playing with just this one for a moment. Now, some of you know enough in Photoshop that I could come over here and go to Threshold, and Threshold will turn this into an absolute black and white image. And you can see that it's done that. And of course, what you'll find is, of course, there's different threshold points I could do. I could, where do I draw the line? And the point is that no matter where I draw the line, there's going to be noise and data on one side or the other. There's really this big spike, right? This big hump of white pixels and this big hump of black pixels. And you can sit here and say, well, somewhere here is the truth, but then, of course, you lose all the lines. Of course, if I do this over here, then, of course, his beard gets too thick. And that's the problem, is that I'm really looking at a print on something that isn't white. So the variations of noise on noise on noise becomes a problem where I have to decide what goes where. And of course, that does mean that at some point, the human factor is going to come in here, look at the original image, go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth until I'm absolutely pixel perfect with what I want. Also, this image isn't square. If you take a look at this image right now, you're going to notice that it's kind of offset a little bit. Now, I'm going to jump ahead a little moment and show you what I mean by that. But if you look at this, if I were to actually bring down guides, you're going to find out is it isn't actually squared up. This is probably because of the nature of the way it was printed, the fact that it was a book, all those little things that can happen. And that's what you're talking about, is that there's this idealized drawing known to man way somewhere else, and now it's been turned into a block. That block's been printed. This book has existed over time. So I want to get back to what this would have looked like before it was printed in the first place. What did the original artist drawing look like before it actually was even turned into a printing block? So I go through, and what I actually end up doing is I actually go through and I bring in some guides, and then I actually distort the image back into a rectangle, which works amazingly well. How well? Well, watch this. It goes from here to there. And if you look at that little thing, look in the lower left-hand corner, and you'll look how quickly that squares up. And while I am technically distorting, what it ends up doing is it undistorts. And once the rectangle is good, everything's good. That's just something else. So that's something I would have done beforehand. I would have done it at this point. I'm not going to do this right now, unless you really want to see me do it. I can show you approximately what I do. Is I bring down some guides. La 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 la. I'm going to do a really crappy job of it, just so you can see the approximate thing. I would actually bring down the guides and I would put them literally exactly on the four corners. Not the four corners of the book, but the four corners of my composition. I'm going to turn the snap off because the snap is very evil at this point. So I can come over here, and then what happens is you'll start to see just how off these things are. That corner's good, that corner's good, but this corner is not, and this corner is not. It almost looks like it's skewed. Now, the fun part, of course, for me is, notice, by the way, I'm on a copy. I'm always on a copy. I could then come over here and do Edit, Transform, Distort. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to distort it until that rectangle is once again rectangular. Assuming that the distortion is rectilinear, which it probably was, if I were to do this properly, and I were to keep fussing on it, it would actually turn the rectangle to a rectangle, and it would probably be what the original image looked like before it had been distorted. Not important right now. I'm going to undo that, clear my guides, and we'll keep moving forward, because somewhere in the oven, I already have one baked. So what's the next step? Well, the next step is to try to convert this into a black and white image. Now, again, I could grayscale it. I can come over here and just grayscale the image. And if I grayscale the image, I can then sort of adjust the contrast, and I can start playing games, and then I can make some back and forth on this. And like, that looks pretty good, but is it really good? Are the lines holding up? And what about the noise up here? And the thing for me is what really bothers me is the noise. The little stray pixels here and there, things that are outliers accordingly. Now, I'm actually pretty good at using color as well, by the way. I could actually go through and say, you know what? If you're in the golden range, I don't want you. It's kind of a neat one right there, because the gold and the yellow range will get rid of a lot of the contrast that I don't want. That's another way of looking at it. Or I can go with the magic wand tool. Now, some of you know the magic wand tool and go, the magic wand tool never works. But instead of the magic wand tool never working, I'm going to use it as a baseline. So for instance, I'm going to come over to the magic wand tool. I'm going to turn contiguous off. I want to grab every pixel similar. I'm going to turn anti-alias off. I'm going to say no funny edges for you. And I'm going to come over here and set my tolerance to 30. And if I were to come over here and grab my black, it's going to grab everything that is black or near black. And that's pretty good. Now, I could have upped my tolerance. Of course, the higher the number, the more it's going to grab instead. So now if I do this, it'll give me a better number. Oh, that was pretty good. Ooh, that looks really good, doesn't it? All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this, edit copy, and I'm going to paste it in place. Paste in place. Now I'm going to turn off that background copy. I'll put white onto the background. Now here's what's fun. What's fun for me is that I don't actually have a black and white image. I have image with noise, image with darkness, and then of course my white is on a separate layer. And this is extremely useful, because a black and white image, a true black and white image is good, but now I can hunt down, and what I want to do is hunt down the badness in here. So let me give you an example of what that's going to look like. Well, again, the white is just for me to have reference to. And of course, how do you know where the stray pixels are? And this is one of my favorite things, is I'm going to come over here and I'm at on the layer styles menu, and I'm going to add a stroke. I'm going to add a nice 9 pixel red stroke, or 5 pixel red stroke. And if I start to zoom in on the image, you're going to start to see that any pixel, no matter how light it is, no matter what color it is going to show up as red. And because what that ends up happening is it basically augmented it. So a pixel that's almost impossible to see, I can see, and then I could come over with my eraser tool and I can start erasing those pixels that I didn't want, which of course makes my life a lot easier. I need to use a larger eraser. Ta-da! And that's going to be part one, is I'm going to go through my entire document, and I'm going to look for bad stray pixels, and I'll zoom in and zoom out. Now, zooming in and zooming out is very useful, but I'll probably stay mostly zoomed in, and I'll remember the H key on my keyboard, which is the hand key, which allows me to come over here and just drag around. That's my H key on my keyboard. And of course, I'll go back to the eraser, which is the E key. I can go over to my eraser. Now, one of the things about the eraser is most of you have your eraser set in the brush mode, and the brush mode will create semi-transparent pixels. It'll create alias. You want to be in the pencil mode. You want to be an absolute eraser here, and that's exactly what this is. And of course, I can come over here and change my size, and I could come over here and I can erase and erase and erase and erase. And I would go through and I would erase the entire image. But you're still going to see that there's a lot of weird data here. Now, I'm going to actually get rid of this weird data in two ways. And of course, if I'd gotten rid of all that data, that'd be nice ahead of time. What you'll notice is that if I turn this off for a second, you'll notice that there's a lot of holes in the image. We'll get back to those holes. What I want to do first is I want to turn all of this data into solid black lines. So I'm going to come over here to my paint bucket tool. I'm going to set my tolerance to 100, which is bigger than 30. I'm going to turn off anti-alias, and I'm going to say fill everything with everything. And if I do that, then the entire, let me turn off contiguous, sorry about that. If I do that, then every pixel on the screen will now be black. There should be no variation in gray whatsoever. And I can tell this by going over to my levels and going, uh-oh, there is 0 variations here. Now, there are holes in my image, but it's pure black. And I can tell this, by the way, another way of telling this is if I come over to Image, Adjustment, Equalize, it's going to go Equalize, there's no variations, all the pixels are the same exact color. So now I have an image that has, now the mistakes are still there. Remember, I can stroke them. And if you'll see, all that noise is still there that I should have gotten rid of earlier. I should have gotten rid of all that earlier. Let's pretend that I have. What you're going to notice is that there's a lot of holes in my image still. Now, there's so many holes in my image, and you realize that when I turned off the anti-aliasing, we ran into some other issues, and that is going to be the fact that, there's a lot of, there's just a little bit of noise that I don't want to be there. If I turn the stroke all the way down to 1, you realize this, I wish that there was a little bit more fill there. And if I were to come over here and make my red stroke black, well, all of a sudden what you're going to see is that all the little holes you have just got filled in. Maybe too much so. So maybe I'm going to make my stroke, instead of 2, I'm going to make it sort of, maybe I'll make it just 1. And maybe that'll help enough. So again, one of the quick ways for me to fill this in is just to stroke everything and watch everything get filled in. And it really is amazing. Now, once I'm happy with that, again, remember I've got all that noise that I should have already gotten rid of. I did already, by the way, that's the point. I can then come over here and I could rasterize my layer style. And now I have a wonderful game I need to play. Turn my white back on the background, and I have to go through and fix this image. Pixel by pixel by pixel. Now, the pixel by pixel here is different than you think, because I'm not just trying to make it look right. I'm trying to make it laserable. I need to make sure that the grooves are big enough. I can't have teeny little things here, which means that there are 3 keyboard commands that I'm going to spend the next several hours on. Don't worry, the video doesn't last several hours. I'm going to spend the next several hours on this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my pencil tool, which, by the way, is under the paintbrush tool. I'm going to have a pencil tool that's like 6 and black. And that means that anywhere that I want to, I can draw, and I could come over here and I can draw in black. That's one part of it. The other part of it is I can use my eraser tool, which is also going to be much smaller. And I can come over here and I can use my eraser tool. Now, if you're like, wait a second, why is there still some alias things there? And I do believe that came from from when I put the stroke in. So I'm just going to come over here and I'll put my fill back in. And yeah, that got rid of that. Those pixels are gone again. So now I'm going to come through here and using the E for the eraser tool. And I'm going to do it at like teeny little thing, like a 3 eraser tool. Maybe a 4. There we go. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to erase the black. With the B, I'm going to fill in the black. And with the H, I'm going to move around the image. And I'm going to spend the next several hours doing that. And you're like, you're kidding, right? No, I'm not, because I want to know that every single line of this image is under my control. And when I'm done, I will go from this to this. And that is what I have done. I have spent hours and hours and hours making sure that every little thing, like, what about those little jagged edges there? Don't worry about those jagged edges. Those jagged edges are actually going to be our friend later on. What I have to worry about is these thin lines. What I have to worry about is whether or not these lines are thick enough to be visible. Remember, there is no white. The white is a white background. It's all just this black. And just to make sure that everything holds up along the way, and here it is again, every little thing along the way. And it's really weird because you get really into the zone with this, where you're like painting and you're like, I'm not even looking at the big picture. I'm looking at the little things, and I zoom out, I zoom in, and you spend a few hours on this, and then you're golden. Now, what's going to happen here is you're going to have this wonderful image, and of course I can come over here. If I put the stroke back on, you'll see, oh look, it's fairly uniform. There's no outliers. I've done exactly what I intended to do. Of course, so we've skipped many, many hours later. All right, magnifying glass, fit screen. Are you happy? I'm happy. This image is a labor of love. It's beautiful, and it's exactly the way I want it to be. Now, is it the exact same image? No. It's the image that as close as I can make it. It's got thick lines and thin lines, but they're all absolute pure black pixels. The white is absolutely, or the negative space is absolutely thick enough that it should be able to laser cut just fine. But here's the next problem. When we go to laser cut, remember, it's going to be pure, a surface here and a surface here. Now, a very, very thin black line is going to be this teeny little itty bitty edge, and let me tell you something, it's going to break off, and it's not going to hold up. Now, in the real world, you wouldn't, when you would carve in, you wouldn't carve a perfect groove. It would create some sort of a slope around that, and we're going to create that slope as well. So we're going to create a slope that is going to reinforce all of our edges so that there's going to be some sort of a curve around our lines that won't actually be printable, and it's going to be for everything that we need to do. But before we do that, we need to come over and do a couple of other items. Now, I'm actually going to make a copy of this file right now, because once you get to the point where your image is done, you want to stop what you're doing and move on to the I'm getting ready to print phase. So I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to take a copy of the file because hard drive space is cheap, and I'm going to call this A28 print. There we go. And I'm actually going to get rid of all the layers I don't need. Voila. Really, I just have these two layers, the black layer and the white layer. Now, you got to understand that when it comes to laser cutting and when it comes to actually making a block print, what you're printing is untouched, right? If I want to, in other words, wherever is black is going to be the part that I don't carve, and wherever is white is going to be the part that I do carve. So it's actually, let's invert it. The background is black and the foreground is white, right? Because it really is an invert. When you ink up the plate, it's the part that isn't cut. So it's kind of a weird reversal here. Plus, because we're going to reverse the image, because they're going to print it and turn it upside down, I need to come over here and do edit, transform, flip horizontal. So now it's backwards. So now it's inverted and it's backwards. Because remember, the laser cutter is going to engrave where it sees black, and it's going to leave alone where it sees white. So far, so good? Good. So if it's going to engrave where it sees black and it's going to leave it alone where it sees white, what I want to do is I want to take, and again, think about it, it's engraving the black. What I want to do is I want to protect the white being the part that's up in arms. And again, you can look at it like these little white pieces here. The white pieces are the ones that are going to be just uncut and easy to break off because it's engraved otherwise. What I want to do is I want to create a ramp around it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and I'm going to create an outer glow. Now let me show you how the outer glow works. The outer glow is, I'm going to make it 100% opaque. And where is it? The outer glow is going to be 100% opaque, and it's going to be white. And it's going to have a precise, and the size is going to make the difference, by the way. I've got it at 37 pixels, but let's just see what that does. So what ends up happening is that the outer glow changes, and it basically expands out from the white, but it isn't white either way. It's a range from black to white. That's what the range is, 100% from black to white. It's got a straight line contour. The other contours you could choose, and it's going to go out. And I'm going to go, let's say, for 37. I think it is the 38 pixels. So what that means is that while the white is the top of the mountain and the black is the valley, what it's created is this grayscale image in between the two. And that grayscale image is something that when we go back to the Glowforge, we're going to tell it that we want to vary the power. And by varying the power, what we're saying is that when you see grayscale, grayscale equals power. And that will create ramps for us, which should create a level of protection to protect our image. So now how do you know how big those ramps should be? It takes time. If the ramps are too small, then they don't do any good. But if the ramps are too big, then what ends up happening is they don't exist at all. Like between these lines up here, it's not going to go all the way down, all the way down. It's going to be gentle. So it's going to be kind of a weirder of a block, and you have to be really good at what you do to make this work. Just remember that at the end of the day, none of this white shows up. The glow will not be on the top level, and this will not affect our final print. It'll just affect the size of our block. And again, I use precise, not softer. I use precise. I do 100% straight contour, 100% opacity, normal mode, white. And I save this, and I bring it into the Glowforge, and I hit burn, and 4 to 6 hours later, because I'm crazy, and I'm doing a really good job. Now you're like, wait a second, how many hours does it take, really? Well, I can tell you this. I definitely want to use the 675 lines per inch. I've set my document up for it. I definitely want to maximize quality and use vary power, and I definitely want to do full power. But the speed of my engrave is going to be everything in terms of the depth of my engrave. So you need to decide what, based on the material you're using, which speed are you going to use? I will tell you that most recently I have found that 1100 has worked very well for me. That works for me. That's based on the age of my laser, the cleanliness of my optics, which are clean, by the way, and of course the type of material that I'm using, which we'll get to in a moment. Are you following so far? All right. Next. Now we get to the slideshow. Because, what's a good slideshow? Want to do a quick disclaimer here during the slideshow that some of what I'm showing you is a mix of two different things here, as I'll explain. Now, I did not mask the image. I know everyone's going to go, did you mask the paper first? No, I didn't mask, because if I put a mask down, I would have spent so much time weeding when I was done, and I wasn't going to worry about it, and I'll explain why in a minute, that regardless, this is going to be a cleanup nightmare. Also, this is going to fill your Glowforge with dust. So be prepared to clean everything when you're done. So here it is mid-process, and here it is on the way out. Now, what I want to be very specific about is which material that I'm working with. And there's actually, I experiment with several different materials. As a matter of fact, I'm not even done with my experiments yet. This actually is MDF. MDF is great because there's no grain to it. Obviously, what you're going to see, though, is there's a nice amount of not I would say burn, but you can see how the smoke and the sort of the weirdness goes this way, and that's a lot of the drift that you're going to see come into play. That being said, I don't experiment with MDF. I tend to experiment with plywood. The bad news about plywood is as follows. You get gaps, you get glue, and look over here. Because of the cleaning process, which I'm going to show you in a minute, the plywood tends to flake. And if anything flakes off, you're screwed. Because, again, only that top level counts. The other thing that you're going to... So there it is. There you lose that. You might as well have nothing there. And you can see the ramp, by the way. You can see how the ramp works. You can see how there's definitely definition here, but the integrity doesn't handle the cleaning process, and there definitely needs to be a cleaning process. The other issue is that this didn't go deep enough, and that's another part that we had to go through as I went through this, trying to decide not whether or not the image had enough differentiation, but in very, very subtle areas whether it went deep enough for me to go through. So I went through and I did it again in MDF, but for now, playing with the plywood was fine as an experiment, but again, for the good stuff, we'll go through. Now, when I talk about cleaning it up, you definitely need to clean it up. Oh my God, there's soot and there's smoke and there's sap. And there's no way around it. When you start cutting these things up, which means that I am rinsing this with hot water and a lot of hot water, and I'm not even scrubbing it yet. I'm just trying to do, it's amazing when you start realizing, when you start seeing all this stuff come off, you realize just how much sap is coming off. And it's sticky, but you can get it off. Then I will tell you my secret. My secret is Gojo. You know, the stuff you use in the mechanics, the orange pumice soap. I just put a shitload on there. I've done it before. You put it on the wood, and then with a very light brush, I barely do anything, you rinse it off again. Now, this is a copy of the plywood rinsed off. And you can see, by the way, look right over there. You see that? Those pieces have just flaked off, and which means that those pieces will not print, as you'll see in a minute. But the one that I just finished this evening is this, and this is the MDF, and it is gorgeous. And I'll be honest with you, I haven't printed it yet. But I wanted to get this video out because there's enough information here for me to show you that. But really, you can see the ramps, right? You can see how it ramps up, but understand that only where it's white is where it's going to print. And even though the ramps are sometimes higher or lower, it's still going to make a big difference as you go forward. And I want to take a moment to linger on just how beautiful that is. That just makes me happy. You almost want to frame that. But no, you don't frame that. What you do is you go back to your plywood and you ink it up. And of course, that means you got to have a good ink. I'm using a water-based ink because I like to be able to clean things up easier without chemicals. You got to put it on you put a nice big bead of it. You roll it up and in both directions, nice big rubber roller. And look, exactly what I showed you. Even though it's just a little bit of a flake off, it's gone. It doesn't hit the surface. But it's really, now over here, that's a mistake over there. That's different. That's why this is the experimental one. And then, of course, you put the paper down. Now, there's different types of people out there. Some people are going to run through a press. If you've got yourself a press, good for you. I appreciate you people with presses. I'm old school. I got a brayer. Hell, sometimes I just got the back of a wooden spoon. And you do that, and you get nice and in there, and you roll it up. And then the reveal, it never gets old. You pull off the print, and there it is. That's my first. This isn't even really fancy paper. This is literally just cheap drawing paper on top of the plywood, and I'm already happy with it. Now, I was joking with a friend of mine. We're going to move into fancier papers. He's like, did you dampen the paper? I'm like, I'll dampen the paper. Actually, I got the paper completely wet. But even then, I got a really nice print off of it. You got those nice solid colors. But again, you can see the pieces are missing. Eventually, I will get back to the MDF, and I'll of course use fancy paper, and everything will be going back to printmaking 101. But there you go. This is all the steps I do, going from an original image that I have a scan from, taking it through Photoshop with an eye on where and how I'm going to be cutting it, go through and make it pure. The funny part is, if you go back over here, all of those jaggedy little lines that I showed you, those teeny little things, remember pixel by pixel, they're gone. And they're gone because that's the nature of the laser. The laser's eating the wood. There's something organic about it. And so for me, it's a matter of, I'd rather the organic things happen than the digital weirdnesses happen later on. Well, I hope this process helped you. I did it only in 32 minutes. My name is Jared Bendis. And again, I am JaredX2 on Twitch, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Patreon, Instagram. Like, share, comment, be nice. I'm sure you've got a better way of doing it. That's fine. We all do our own little thing. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you are looking to buy a Glowforge, I'll give you my referral code. All right. Thanks for watching, and good night.